Reflections on the vicissitudes of the ancient world inevitably lead to historical enigmas, full of unexpected turns. Amidst the vibrant kaleidoscope of Hellenic city-states, Sparta, despite its modest population, rose as one of the most influential and renowned. Such a discrepancy could not but provoke astonishment. How did such a small community manage to achieve such remarkable power and military hegemony? However, a deeper dive into the distinctive institutions of Spartan society transforms initial surprise into admiration for their unique and consistent logic. These very words open the seminal treatise known as the Constitution of the Lacedaemonians. This invaluable source was authored by Xenophon in the early 4th century BCE. An Athenian by birth, Xenophon had the unique opportunity to spend several years in close contact with the Spartans, enabling him to leave us the most comprehensive and reliable account of their peculiar way of life. Without his insightful observations and meticulous records, our knowledge of Sparta's unique customs would be exceedingly scarce, buried beneath the sands of time and layers of myth. But what exactly were these extraordinary customs that so astonished their contemporaries? At its core, ancient Sparta built its entire social structure around a singular objective, achieving maximum military effectiveness at any cost. Legendary discipline, honed to a fine art, and an unparalleled ability to mobilize its entire male population for military campaigns allowed this small city-state to rise and become the undisputed dominant land power throughout Hellas. Though other Greek city-states spoke the same language and worshipped the same gods, they regarded Sparta with a sense of almost alien wonder, seeing it as something foreign and unfathomable. So, which specific Spartan institutions shaped this exceptional civilization, and why did Xenophon consider them the true source of Sparta's unprecedented power? The answers to these questions lie deep within their self-sacrificing and ascetic existence, unveiling the mysteries of ancient power. The Spartan state was governed by a unique system of diarchy, where the reins of power were shared by two kings, each hailing from a different royal house. These monarchs held equal authority and governed the country concurrently. According to legend, Sparta itself was founded by Heracles, who arrived from overseas with an army, conquered the land, and enslaved the local Greek population. He then handed over the conquered territory to his twin descendants, Eurysthenes and Proclus, whose Agiad and Eurypontid dynasties subsequently ruled the city jointly for over 7 centuries. Thus, the Spartans perceived themselves as foreign conquerors, a key element of their self-identity that determined their cautious attitude towards anyone not belonging to their community, including their own slaves. The descendants of the enslaved Greeks were known as Helots and vastly outnumbered the Spartans. Exact figures are unknown, but estimates range from 3-to-1 to as high as 7-to-1. This circumstance generated constant anxiety and fear within Spartan society of a potential uprising by the oppressed, which could overthrow the rule of their foreign masters. The Spartans were convinced that the downfall of their city would come at the hands of rebellious Helots. Despite the constant stress associated with controlling the Helots, Spartan society tolerated this burden because large-scale enslavement brought immense wealth. Upon reaching adulthood, every Spartan man received a plot of public land from the city, along with a group of Helots to cultivate it. The income generated from each such farm was so substantial that it transformed every Spartan citizen into a landed aristocrat, freeing them from the necessity of working for their livelihood. In Sparta, despite the extensive public land holdings intended to support an ascetic lifestyle, private property continued to exist, playing a significant role in shaping the social structure. Particular significance was given to the Spartan law of inheritance, which astonished and even horrified other Greek city-states. Upon a Spartan's death, his public land allotment reverted to the state, however, private property passed to his widow, not his son. At first glance, this detail might seem minor, but one must consider the high mortality rate among men in Spartan warrior society. Many women, inheriting their husband's property, dedicated their lives to significantly increasing these assets. Ultimately, upon their deaths, the accumulated land holdings were divided equally among their children, regardless of gender. This was the radical aspect of the Spartan inheritance system. Imagine a wealthy young woman marrying an equally affluent man. Should he fall in battle, a common occurrence, she would become the full heir to his entire estate, transforming from merely well-off to extraordinarily rich. She would then have a lifetime not only to grow these inherited assets but also to ensure their transfer to her descendants, both sons and daughters. Thus, wealthy women contributed to the emergence of even wealthier women. These affluent ladies, in turn, married wealthy men, and during periods of high male mortality, a snowball effect was created, leading to the concentration of wealth in the hands of a small group of individuals. These influential women came to be known as Spartan heiresses. Aristotle noted that, in his time, approximately 40% of Sparta's entire territory was owned and managed by a small circle of wealthy women. Their wealth significantly surpassed that of other Spartans, including even the kings themselves. In fact, they constituted an independent political force. Often, influential figures in Sparta, including the monarchs, found themselves reliant on loans provided by the Spartan heiresses. Their influence was immense. Attempts at land reform were thwarted by these women, who used financial leverage and political bribery. The rest of Greece was astonished that such a small group of women wielded such significant control over Spartan political life. Aristotle expressed dissatisfaction that wealthy Spartan wives dominated their less affluent husbands, and also that the entire female population was corrupted by their licentiousness and luxury. Despite possessing impressive wealth, the Spartans, even centuries later, continued to perceive themselves as foreign conquerors. In their collective consciousness, there was a constant sense of being on the brink of ruin, of the complete annihilation of their civilization. It was for this reason that Spartan society paid particular attention to prophecies and omens. Dealing with a multitude of often contradictory predictions could become an all-consuming task, and so each king had two assistants tasked with overseeing this complex domain. If one of the kings required consultation with a regional oracle, such as the famous Delphic oracle, he would immediately dispatch one of these trusted assistants to convey the query. In a sense, the kings served as the chief religious representatives within the city-state. Their constant presence served as a religious justification for Sparta's continued existence, a central and indispensable element of Spartan religious life. However, from a practical standpoint, the city continued to thrive and endure due to Sparta's exceptional and formidable military might. Strictly regulated, the kings were the only two individuals permitted to command Spartan armies. During a military campaign, one of the kings essentially became an absolute monarch. His word became inviolable law. He wielded unrestricted power over the life and death of every Spartan citizen and could even confiscate property if he deemed it necessary for the successful prosecution of the war. Spartan monarchs, while entitled to a share of all spoils captured during military operations, did not necessarily become fabulously wealthy as a result. On the contrary, the royal office was a rather costly undertaking. Sparta's rulers regularly, and at times even obsessively, sought counsel from oracles. Moreover, they were invariably expected to make generous, truly royal offerings to the patron temple. Any display of parsimony or underestimation of the sanctuary's importance would inevitably be perceived as a direct insult to the deity it was dedicated to, an utterly unthinkable transgression for the deeply superstitious Spartans. Spartan monarchs, among other things, bore the weight of significant financial obligations that are often overlooked. During military campaigns, they had to provide a portion of their personal livestock for sacrifices that preceded almost every important strategic or tactical decision. If, after a ritual sacrifice, the omens remained unfavorable, the king was obliged to continue the rites, offering new sacrifices until the portents became favorable. The mass slaughter of such a quantity of animals meant that the royal treasury during a campaign would be literally emptied. Ritual animal sacrifices became so integral and frequent that, at a certain point, to ensure a continuous supply of sacrificial animals for the kings, a special law was enacted, obliging one piglet from each litter to be taken to replenish the monarch's personal herd. Their functions were limited exclusively to religious and military aspects. The management of state affairs rested entirely with other officials. The individuals responsible for shaping Sparta's legislative framework bore the title of ephors. The name itself translates as overseers, and the meaning of this designation becomes clear upon further examination of their powers. There were 5 ephors in the Spartan state, each required to be at least 45 years old, and their term of service was precisely 1 year. Upon the expiration of their term, an ephor was permanently disqualified from holding the office again. While it is appropriate to use the term elected, it should be noted that the selection process itself was highly complex, and the full picture of its mechanisms remains unclear to this day. However, based on available evidence, it can be asserted that the Spartans, through public vote, selected an unspecified number of candidates, and then 5 of these chosen contenders were randomly selected to serve as ephors for the current year. Thus, it is definitively known that the selection procedure included an element of chance, but the exact degree of this randomization remains unknown. Whether there were 10 candidates on the list or perhaps 100, these details are lost to the depths of time. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle noted that this influential office often went to relatively poor Spartans, and if this assertion is true, the degree of randomness in the selection process could have been quite significant. At the beginning of each new Spartan year, immediately after taking office, the College of Ephors embarked on their first and deeply symbolic ritual. They solemnly affirmed a state of war between Sparta and the Helots, conducting an intricate and meaningful ceremony. This ritual served as a constant reminder to all Spartans that they were not the autochthonous population of this land and that, in essence, they were in a state of unceasing armed confrontation with their own slaves. In practice, however, the Spartans cynically used this formal state of war to justify acts of cruelty and inhumane treatment towards the Helot population, who, by all accounts, gave no cause for such treatment. After concluding the distribution of helots on their first day, the ephors' attention shifted to the primary task that occupied them throughout the year, the unceasing oversight of the Spartan king's activities. At the beginning of each new month, the 2 reigning monarchs and the 5 ephors would gather to exchange solemn oaths. The kings would address the ephors with the words, "I shall rule in accordance with the established laws of the state," to which the ephors would respond, "So long as you uphold your oath, we shall maintain the royal power inviolate." But what was implied by the phrase, royal power inviolate? The ephors possessed colossal power and the right to exercise comprehensive oversight. Should a king's actions incur their disapproval, they could initiate a vote and, by a simple majority of 3 votes to 2, formally accuse the monarch of committing an offense. In the event of such an accusation, a trial would be immediately convened. The ephors took responsibility for gathering and subsequently presenting all necessary evidence, and then united with another influential body, the Gerousia, to jointly perform the functions of jurors. If the king was found guilty, the range of possible punishments was wide, from the imposition of a fine to complete deprivation of the crown and banishment from Sparta. In the case of the extreme measure, banishment, the royal crown would pass to the next heir in the line of succession. It is important to remember that, according to Spartan beliefs, Heracles himself had granted their kings the right to rule this land. Thus, the removal of a king from power, though an extremely serious act, never resulted in a breach of the sacred line of succession. In Sparta, despite their high standing, the kings were not entirely immune to the ephors' control. However, instances of monarchs being removed from power were exceptionally rare. Even when surrounded by hostile ephors, a king could hope that their term of office would expire in just 1 year. Astute rulers preferred to bide their time, remaining in the shadows of political struggle until their opponents left office. During severe periods of war, Spartan kings had no opportunity to shirk an active role. Their duty commanded them to be on the front line, personally leading Spartan troops. During these military campaigns, they were constantly accompanied by 2 ephors. This number was of fundamental importance. These 2 ephors were not permitted to act at their own discretion. They could neither bring charges against the king nor interfere with the conduct of military operations. Their primary task was to meticulously document events and subsequently report their observations to the ephors remaining in Sparta. Only upon the conclusion of hostilities could all ephors jointly decide whether the monarch had exceeded his authority. In peacetime, when Sparta was not engaged in wars, the ephors' activities focused on developing state policy. Voting on proposed initiatives took place among the 5 ephors, and a simple majority, meaning at least 3 votes, was required for approval. It is important to note that there were virtually no restrictions on the topics they could raise. However, approval by the College of Ephors did not guarantee the automatic transformation of a proposal into law. Discussions on taxes and state expenditures, naturally, occupied a significant portion of their time, but debates on the fundamental principles of morality and the preservation of the traditional Spartan way of life were no less important. Once agreement was reached on a legislative act, the ephors presented it for consideration to the Apella, the assembly of all adult Spartan men. Having heard the proposed initiative, the Spartans expressed their opinion by oral vote, choosing between approval and rejection. No amendments or discussions were permitted, the decision came down to a simple affirmation or rejection. In summary, when considering Sparta's political structure, it is worth emphasizing that the two kings exercised both spiritual leadership and military command. At the same time, the College of Five Ephors exercised comprehensive control and approved laws with the support of the popular assembly. Beyond this, the ephors handled numerous other crucial matters of state administration. They determined who was permitted to enter and leave Sparta's borders. This applied not only to merchants and diplomats but also to historians, such as Xenophon, who sought to learn more about this unique society. Xenophon was fortunate to spend several years in Sparta, establishing close relations with one of the reigning kings. However, even for him, the future in Sparta remained uncertain. Each year, the ephors were re-elected, and each new body decided whether to permit a foreigner to remain in Sparta. The ephors very rarely allowed Spartans to leave their homeland, even for compelling reasons. This was due to the Spartans' reputation for often behaving dissolutely when outside Sparta. They indulged in drunkenness, gambling, debauchery, and fighting, forgetting all moderation. Within their own communities, Spartans strictly adhered to austere rules of conduct, but away from home, all prohibitions seemed to lose their power. Among their other duties, the ephors played a crucial role in educating the younger generation of Spartans. When young men reached adulthood, the ephors began the process of selecting the best among them. From the graduates, the ephors chose 3 young men who, in their opinion, excelled above others and fully embodied Spartan values. Each of these 3 chosen young men was granted the right to select 100 individuals from among their peers. Each selection was meticulously scrutinized by the ephors to ensure its adherence to the established criteria. Upon completion of this multi-stage process, the 3 young men initially selected by the ephors became officers, and the hundreds they chose became their subordinates. Together, these groups formed the royal guard, which served one of the Spartan kings. At the conclusion of their allotted 1-year term of office, the ephors immediately reported to their successors. This meeting was dedicated to a comprehensive and meticulous analysis of all actions and decisions taken by them during their year in power. In essence, it was a rigorous official review, a form of audit of their activities. Should any abuses of power or exceeding of authority be discovered, the newly elected ephors had the full right to impose any punishments they deemed just and necessary upon their predecessors. Despite the potentially significant instability that could have arisen from the random selection of ephors and their limited annual term, it was this effective mechanism of subsequent oversight and strict accountability that successfully curbed the ephors from attempting any overly radical or destabilizing decisions. Perhaps, at times, this restraint was even excessive. Known historical accounts concerning the activities of the ephors consistently reveal a curious gap: they lack any mention of significant legislative initiatives or achievements. Remarkably, no such accomplishment was recorded in the historical annals. This absence can be attributed to several hypotheses. One suggests that the annual official review procedure, conducted at the end of their term, might have inspired such awe that it stifled any initiative. Another possibility is that such achievements did occur but were, for some reason, not documented. Ultimately, the sources available to us are extremely fragmentary, and the completeness of our knowledge about this period leaves much to be desired, likely covering only a fraction of the reality. Finally, it cannot be ruled out that the ephors' powers were intentionally restricted by some external influential group. It is this hypothesis of external constraints that logically leads us to consider the role of the Gerousia. This institution, known as the Gerousia, served as a crucial counterbalance, restraining the potentially excessive power of the ephors. The name Gerousia itself translates as the Council of Elders, accurately reflecting the essence of this body. It comprised 28 full members. They were joined by the 2 reigning kings, who held honorary positions within the Gerousia, bringing its official membership to 30. Beyond the monarchs, to be elected to the Gerousia, one had to be a man over 60 years of age, possess an impeccable reputation, and demonstrate significant merit and achievements. However, despite these formal criteria, actual practice showed that almost all members of this council originated from a very limited circle of Sparta's wealthiest and most influential families. Unlike the ephors, whose authority was time-limited, membership in the Gerousia was elective but lifelong. Upon the death of a geront, as members of the Gerousia were known, a fierce struggle for the vacant seat would immediately commence. While absolute certainty on this matter is unattainable due to the incompleteness of historical data, a number of researchers lean towards the view that stable political factions formed around the 2 royal dynasties. Each of these factions sought to secure the election of its protégé, making the electoral process highly tense and competitive. The actual operations of the Gerousia constituted a complex system of checks and balances. This influential body held an absolute right of veto over any decision made by the assembly of Spartan citizens. In other words, even if the ephors proposed legislative initiatives and the citizens of Sparta approved them, the Gerousia could, at the last moment, block them by declaring them unacceptable. Furthermore, the Gerousia possessed the right to determine the agenda for each session of the popular assembly. Thus, even if the ephors drafted numerous beneficial laws, the Gerousia could simply exclude them from consideration. Given the ephors' annual term of office, the Gerousia could easily obstruct their activities until a new body of ephors was elected. Unsurprisingly, the Gerousia exerted a significant conservative influence on Sparta's political culture. Any reforms required its approval. During the voting process of the Spartan Citizen Assembly, the Gerousia played a peculiar role. Members of the Gerousia were situated in a separate building, located nearby the assembly grounds. The ephors presided over the assembly and presented legislative proposals, while the populace voted orally. The Gerousia, from a distance, could not see the voting process but could hear the citizens' voices. After the vote concluded, members of the Gerousia would step forward and announce which side had demonstrated greater vocal activity. It was believed that the side which sounded louder was victorious. This was done to maintain an appearance of impartiality for the Gerousia, although it retained the right to veto the voting results if they were displeasing to them. As previously noted, when a king faced trial or a citizen was accused of a serious crime, such as murder, the ephors and the Gerousia jointly formed a jury panel of 35 individuals. Kings, being honorary members of the Gerousia, could even sit on the jury during their own trials. The outcome of a case was determined by a simple majority vote, and as the elected members of the Gerousia occupied 28 of the 35 seats on this jury, their influence was always decisive. Spartan kings preferred to consult informally with the Gerousia before making important decisions. This allowed the elders to feel their importance, and if the ephors ever decided to hold a king accountable, it was beneficial to know that his actions had been agreed upon with the Gerousia. Sparta was an exceedingly cautious and conservative state, and the Gerousia served as the primary institutional source of this prudence. Centuries after Sparta's decline, the Roman statesman Cicero expressed deep reverence for the Spartan political system. He was struck by how Spartan kings lived with the constant awareness of the possibility of being overthrown at any moment. He was impressed that the ephors, the highest officials, were obliged to account for their actions to their successors after their term of office concluded. He highly valued the power of the Gerousia, the Council of Elders, and how these wise old men could balance competing interests or block legislative initiatives if a situation spiraled out of control. Cicero saw in such an institutional arrangement a guarantee of incredible stability, which was especially valuable to him as a conservative who prioritized stability above all else. Xenophon shared this viewpoint, considering Spartan institutions and the stability they provided to be the cornerstone of the state's strength. Ultimately, however, it was arguably this excessive stability that proved fatal for Sparta. At its zenith, this state could field its entire male citizen population, forming an army of at least 20,000 warriors, and possibly more. Yet a century and a half later, by the time of Alexander the Great, this formidable force had dwindled to a mere 1,000 men, and the reasons for such a drastic weakening remain debated among historians. This is why Philip, Alexander the Great's father, could calmly disregard any threats from the Spartans. A further 150 years on, when the powerful Romans began actively intervening in the political affairs of Greece, Sparta had become little more than a village, historical curiosity which, nonetheless, continued to exist under the rule of its traditional kings, Ephors, and Gerousia, stubbornly adhering to its strict ancient customs. The true reasons for this swift and inexplicable decline still remain a subject of debate. Nevertheless, it is plausible to suggest that just one or two key reforms, implemented over those 3 centuries, could have initiated a resurgence and prevented Sparta's fatal weakening. Perhaps attracting new inhabitants from outside, a fresh start, could have provided significant assistance. It is also possible that granting full citizenship to a certain number of Helot slaves would have strengthened the state. Or perhaps, relaxing the strict rules concerning marriage could have been a path to renewal and the preservation of Spartan society. Contrary to the most pessimistic predictions, the austere Spartans never had to endure the horror of a bloody uprising by enslaved Helots or face a united front of enraged Greek city-states. Fate decreed otherwise. Their former greatness gradually dissolved into the mists of time, much like muscles atrophied from disuse. Ultimately, this led to their absorption by a new wave of conquerors, who viewed the Spartans as a relic of the past, an archaic anachronism, akin to a memento from a long-vanished, more brilliant era.